right. Does everybody see the presentation? Okay. Hello and welcome everybody to our Community Data Watch Friday. I think today's the first day of spring, if I'm not mistaken. So I've decided it's spring, and here we go. Um, and today we're going to talk about retention of immigrants in Halton. So um, we've got Richard here who wrote the report and is the expert on all things data. I'll definitely lean on Richard a little bit for some of the data questions, but I did have the good honor of helping with editing the paper and connecting with the peer review comments. So thank you to everybody who took the time to peer review. And yeah, it's been a really fascinating deep dive. So I'm really excited we're really excited to share it with you. And I'm also joined by Risha Burke here, and I think I also saw Reese on here as well, who's with us right at the moment. So yeah, so welcome everybody. We'll just jump in. There's a lot to get through, so please do ask any follow-up questions if I go through some of the data quickly. But here we go. So we're going to ground ourselves in a land acknowledgement to get started. So acknowledging that Halton is rich in the history and modern traditions of Indigenous peoples. Halton is on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, part of the Anishinaabe Nation that extends from the Niagara Peninsula across Hamilton, Halton, and Toronto to the Rouge River Valley. We thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations for sharing their traditional territory with us, and we also recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. And to that point, to that end, we sometimes like to also ground ourselves in the teaching of the two-row wampum belt, which represents the foundational agreement between the Haudenosaunee and European settlers of North America, or Turtle Island. Symbolized by two parallel rows of purple beads on a bed of white, it represents how different peoples traveling side by side along the river of life, each following their own path, yet moving forward together in mutual friendship, peace, and respect. And an acknowledgement that we all share the same air, waters, and lands that sustain us. So this teaching reflects belonging, in particular, as a shared effort, cultivated through relationships, recognition, and reciprocity. It's a dynamic and deeply human experience, interwoven with our unique and collective identities, histories, cultures, and visions for the future. And this is particularly relevant in this conversation we're having today, and it's something I've been reflecting on, in putting this presentation together, and the role of belonging and shared community, particularly for our immigrants and newcomers to Halton. And belonging, as we'll see in the presentation, makes up a significant piece to the intent to remain in a community when someone finds themselves there. And so yeah, it's really really important to ground ourselves in that teaching. So I'll just briefly share a little bit about us. We're Community Development Halton, and that includes both the Social Planning Council for the region, as well as Halton's Volunteer Center. And so we really focus on civic engagement, volunteer engagement, and connecting people with good information, good research, and always focusing on action with what we're learning. And a little bit later, I'll share some links and some posters for upcoming Volunteer Halton workshop series. We have an annual Congress coming up, and National Volunteer Week, which comes up in April. So check out our website for more information on that. It's a very exciting time indeed. We'll also share this out, but Volunteer Connector, if anyone's looking for volunteers, this is a really fabulous platform that our colleague Heather Johnson manages, and please do check it out. It's a great way to get connected with folks looking to get involved. Really briefly about social planning. Again, you can find more info on our website, but we've had a recent film screening event around affordable housing. We're very involved in housing advocacy, and we work with a network of folks in the community, which is really exciting. We've recently published a youth engagement research project on the 40-hour volunteer requirement for high school students, and we've got a couple of podcasts. So yeah, please do reach out if you have any questions about any of that. A special thanks to United Way of Halton and Hamilton for supporting our ongoing work. And a huge thank you to our peer reviewers who supported this paper. There were a lot of really thoughtful and meaningful comments, and I think it's really enriched the paper in a big way and grounded it in community. So a huge thank you for your efforts there. And last but not least, we'd also like to thank the Regional Municipality of Halton as well for their ongoing support. We're really quite blessed to have so much support in our corner to be able to continue this work. Um, and as new census information comes out, and as we collect stories in the community, being able to share with you all in this way is has been very meaningful and a way for us to drive some actions forward. So I'll kind of start with looking at the data from this for this report. So this includes the Institute of Canadian Citizenship, or the ICCC, or ICC. Sorry, I used an extra C. Um, and which covers a lot of the question of why immigrants choose to stay. So this includes questions of belonging, safety, job opportunities from the ICC's Leaky Bucket report series, which tracks onward migration and helps explain why immigrants leave Canada over time. The main data source is the IMDB, um, which stands for the Longitudinal Immigration Database, focusing on the 5-year retention patterns by municipality. So we'll kind of look at the data broken down by each municipality in Halton, as well as looking at some categories such as admission, age and gender, region of birth, along with newcomers' early economic outcomes. We also borrow the terms newcomer and recent immigrant from the Halton Newcomer Strategies definition of newcomers as those who landed in Canada in the last 10 years. Statistics Canada similarly defines recent immigrants as those who landed in Canada 5 years prior to the census. And so this would include folks that have arrived between 2016 and 2021 for the purposes of our report here. So this data includes tax filers who were admitted into Canada in 2017 and filed tax returns. Um, so moving on, we'll take a look at some of the factors that shape early settlement experiences. I think I was just going to share a few more points about our main data source, um, which it has been really helpful in understanding where immigrants settle, where folks remain, or whether they remain in their intended destination community. It allows for a detailed examination of retention by various categories. But one really important point to share is a key limitation to the data, and that is that the data we have available does not distinguish between interprovincial, interprovincial, and international outmigration. So if folks leave Halton Region, we have an understanding of retention rates, who's leaving, who's staying, but we don't know whether they've left Halton Region for another region in Ontario, or indeed in Canada, or even if they've left Canada. And so this is a bit of a gap in the data, but hopefully, taken together, looking at data from the Statistics Canada and kind of the national context with local stories and local data, we can paint a little bit of a picture of the local story here. So, starting with motivations to stay, um, a 2025 national survey of about 5,000 immigrants by the ICC, the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, provides insights into what motivates people to move to Canada and why newcomers intend to remain permanently. So the composition of residents is broken down by the categories of age, gender, household, country of origin, time in Canada, and immigration category. Um, so among those cohorts, the top 3 reasons given for motivations to stay in Canada were the standard of living, um, job opportunities, and security. Um, And as you can see here on the screen, the ICC survey also identified the 5 core factors that strongly influence newcomers' desire to stay. So not just their motivation for coming, but their motivation for remaining in Canada. Um, and the strongest pieces were optimism about the future, identity and belonging, um, and for those who felt optimistic about their future in Canada, they were 25 percentage points more likely to intend to stay long term. So that piece about feeling optimistic about the future um, has a very large impact on people's calculus in determining to stay. Similarly, programs and services also made up a meaningful part of that calculus for staying or for remaining. They help make Canada more life in Canada more meaningful, enjoyable, and rewarding. And these can include initiatives for skills development and labor market integration, activities that connect folks with family and friends, and programs that provide opportunities to engage in things like social, recreational, civic activities and experiences. So really thinking about, the way that the role of our systems and services in facilitating social connection is a really key pillar. So understanding onward migration. So this refers to folks who have come to the region, but then who have continued on elsewhere. And again, we don't necessarily know where folks go when they leave the region, but we do have some understanding of what those patterns look like. So according to the Leaky Bucket 2025 report by the ICC, about 1 in 5 immigrants departs Canada within 25 years of landing. But this was found to not be evenly distributed among all newcomers. Um, in particular, folks with higher levels of education and skill sets, particularly in the fields of engineering, information and communications technology, business and financial management, and healthcare, um, have higher rates of leaving Canada as a whole within the 25 years of landing. And this has like temporal components as well. Um, so these 3 graphs here show onward migration after 5 years of landing, after 15 years, and after 25 years. And as we can see, there's definitely higher numbers of folks with master's or doctoral degrees that are more likely to leave over time, and it could be due to um, having more flexibility in the labor market or the need to find skills that are aligned with that education, and moving elsewhere to make that possible. And it could also be a factor of cost of living, given that student loans can be a longer term burden. Um, and we can see over time that these rates increase the longer folks are remaining in Canada. So towards the 25-year mark, we have 32% of master's degrees and 34% of doctoral degrees um, that leave Canada after landing. But importantly, we do want to look at the role of belonging in all of this. It's not just an economic picture, and and when we look at retention trends and the reasons that folks remain, belonging is a big part of that. And so we just wanted to share some excerpts from a belonging story project that CDH conducted along with our community partners and our friends at OK and Header and Grandmother's Voice. Um, to really get to understand what belonging looked and felt like through lived experience in our region, especially for immigrants and newcomers. And these are 2 somewhat different stories that 2 different folks shared. So one is, I came to Canada in 2021 to pursue higher education. At first, it was an incredibly overwhelming experience. I was adjusting to a new culture, a different academic system, and the pressure of managing everything on my own. I spent countless hours searching for part-time jobs just to support myself. all while trying to keep up with my studies. The loneliness of being in a new country, coupled with the financial stress of paying for my education, often left me feeling isolated and even depressed. Um, Another experience was that I'm very fortunate that in Milton we have a great neighborhood. I was amazed with diversity and inclusivity in Milton because even in my neighborhood, in my street, there are people from 10 different countries. We have a beautiful community here. When I go to the park, when I take my little one, I meet wonderful people, newcomers, oldcomers, parents of some newcomers, right? We always welcome them. That's why now, if somebody asks me, where do you belong? I tell them I'm from Milton. So, in these stories, we can see so many different factors already between, cost of living, trying to cover, trying to keep up um, um, with, working through education, but then also the impact of social life and a social fabric in spaces like community parks that can facilitate that. So, um, I think stories really help ground us in that kind of lived experience and local context. So looking at the 5-year retention trends, so these on this graph, this depicts the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, the GTHA, which still remains the primary destination for immigrants in Ontario, but the rates do vary by municipality. So we can see here a consistent downward trend between 2017 and 2022 across all municipalities. Um, this also happens to be, the period of time primarily, or a good chunk of it was the COVID-19 pandemic, and so, we might, ask questions about that relationship between the pandemic and these trends. But overall, we see a decrease of nearly 20% in Toronto and Peel, the two biggest declines, suggesting that a portion of immigrants relocate from Toronto and Peel to suburban or secondary cities, perhaps with greater affordability and competitive labor markets. Halton Region experienced a similar downward trend. So here we see 74.2% in 2017 to 59% in 2022. Um, so this means that Halton in 2017 retained 74% of immigrants, but by 2022, only 59. But this is comparable to our neighboring regions of Durham and York. So again, suggesting there are broader themes at work here around maybe housing affordability overall in Ontario and the impacts of the pandemic. Um, and unemployment also was an additional metric, again, potentially impacted by the pandemic. Um, yeah, a few important factors. So here we have retention rates specific to Halton broken down by its municipalities. Um, so this shows the proportion of immigrants who continue to reside in their municipality of intended settlement over time. And it tells a story about the relationship between local conditions and newcomer retention or integration. Um, we see the largest declines happening in Oakville and Burlington, which are the two larger urban areas in our region. Um, I believe Milton remains still the highest retention by a little bit, and Halton Hills um, uh, having the lowest number, not the steepest decline, but the lowest number of retained immigrants. And again, that could be due to a combination of um, the size of community networks, availability of or accessibility of the labor market, um, and and housing affordability. So we were able to look at a little bit at the qualitative reasons for each community based on statistical data, what we know about those communities. Um, again, looking at Milton being sort of right in the middle there. It had a relatively higher retention in 2022, experiencing rapid population growth, expanded housing development, proximity to employment hubs to Brampton, Mississauga, um, and strong community networks, specifically among South Asian, Middle Eastern, and Filipino communities. Um, so again, we're looking at the impacts of geography as well, with Halton Hills being in the north, perhaps further away from the larger urban areas. and local variations in housing markets, job access, and settlement services. So here we're looking at retention rates by admission category. So we have the different admission categories, and I'll give you a little sense of what that looks like. So we saw earlier that all municipalities experienced a decline in retention during the 2017 to 2022 period. But this did vary, and so that reflects differences in economic integration, family ties, and access to support. Um, so, for example, economic principal applicants showed the highest retention, dropping from 82% in 2017 to 67% in 2022, suggesting that while most remain in Halton, for the first few years, a notable share relocate over time. So this really reinforces what we saw earlier around the 5, 15, and 25-year retention patterns and the way that, especially for folks with more specific education and skill sets, folks are more likely to relocate over extended periods of time. Um, Immigrants sponsored by family had a moderately high retention initially, but did decline steadily. The sharpest drop was experienced by economic migrants or immigrants, spouse and dependents. This suggests that greater mobility and vulnerability to economic pressures is a significant piece. This group is more likely to relocate if household employment or schooling needs cannot be met locally. Broken down by age and gender. Older immigrants, so folks that are 55 years and older, both male and female exhibit the highest and most stable retention rates. They're often sponsored parents or established immigrants that are joining family networks that really tether and anchor them to the community. So again, reinforcing that the importance of that sense of belonging and that social cohesion as a core part of retention. Um, Core working age adults, so those aged 25 to 54, show a sharp decline in retention over time. But this likely reflects the pursuit of employment, again, housing affordability, starting a family, or career advancement in neighboring labor markets, or perhaps labor markets that are completely outside of the province or the country. Younger adults, aged 15 to 24, have a relatively moderate but stable retention rate, suggesting that while some may leave for post-secondary education or early career opportunities, a portion do remain if social ties are strong. Notably, female retention rates often start slightly higher than males across most of these age groups. This could reflect differences in disproportionate childbearing responsibility, things like that may suggest more reasons to stay, especially among younger adults by 2019. So looking at retention areas from area of birth, this also can vary. So immigrants from Europe and Eastern Asia have the highest retention rates in Halton Region consistently, while those from Southern Asia or Africa and the Middle East exhibit lower and more rapidly declining retention rates. Um, Oceania and other parts of Asia, sharp declines over time. South and Central America, the United States demonstrate moderate but relatively stable retention. And these can be influenced by greater core housing need, especially among some groups that we know and from some of our research in housing. So for those of West Asian, Korean, or Arab Canadians, there's a greater core housing need among those demographics. And so affordability can be a big part of the decision. We also could look at underemployment, limited access to culturally specific community supports in a given area. Um, and again, looking at income, there's a few important pieces here. Um, when we talk about affordability, it's not just the cost of living, but also income among folks and the significantly lower median income earnings of immigrants compared to the overall population. Um, so immigrants admitted to Canada in 2017 and residing in Halton Region experienced double income growth across all major income categories from 2018 to 2022. So that's significant. So the median income doubled in that period. Um, but it's important to note that they're still substantially lower than the overall population, and so there are equity differences in income equity to be found here. Um, so I mean, we're talking about a rise from 32,000 to 49,000, a 52% increase. Um, but this compares to, for the general population, 121,000 as a median income. So quite different, and perhaps kind of helps highlight reasons why, housing affordability and job prospects are so critical to decisions to stay. So looking at challenges to immigration retention. So this comes out of the Halton Newcomer Strategy Community Survey in 2023. So this is very recent data. Um, but some of the highlights include like positive pieces around how immigrants and newcomers largely view Halton as welcoming, safe, and trusting of local institutions, especially municipal governance. 60% responded that crimes against newcomers were not a problem in Halton for them. 53% responded that they feel safe in their community. Um, 82% trusted their municipal government. 73% trusted their provincial and federal government. So those are quite high. But then we still have our economic and structural barriers highlighted in the survey, which included economic pressures, housing affordability, and labor market challenges. So again, like a really interesting and important balance and dynamic between the social factors that keep a community together and keep folks in the community of intention, their intended community that they landed in, versus the economic and structural barriers that can impact how sustainable it is to remain in a community. So conclusions and calls to action. So this analysis paints a picture of Halton's retention patterns for the immigrant cohort admitted in 2017, highlighting a constellation of economic conditions, geography and transportation differences, housing affordability, cost of living, labor market outcomes, and access to services. Importantly, this data also shows a high level of trust in democratic institutions and an overall feeling of safety and sense of belonging in Halton. The IMDB data demonstrates notable declines in 5-year retention rates across all municipalities, reflecting pressures that are consistent with local survey findings in the Halton Newcomer Strategy Community Survey, confirming newcomers struggle with securing affordable housing, finding employment aligned with their skills, and accessing essential services. These factors may not be unique to Halton, but they do shape how national retention dynamics are experienced locally. National findings reinforce this through the ICC Leaky Bucket report. It's a tongue twister, which shows that immigrants are more likely to stay where they experience economic stability, a strong sense of belonging, confidence in institutions, and optimism about the future. The leaky bucket highlights specifically the critical gap between intention and outcome, with a significant portion leaving over time when opportunities for advancement or living costs become unsustainable. So these sources taken together reveal that immigrant retention is not a single moment, but a long-term process. Motivation to stay must be reinforced over time through local conditions that enable newcomers to build secure and fulfilling lives. So we have some calls to action, in terms of what this could look like, and what role to get us started in thinking about what role we each play in either promoting a sense of belonging for newcomers and recent immigrants to establishing a system and supporting the system in creating opportunities and spaces for people to feel safe. So a few of these could include expanding affordable and suitable housing options. That's a huge piece to affordability, particularly prioritizing rental housing that meets newcomers' needs and income levels. Improving labor market integration, so enhancing employer engagement, particularly with the foreign credential recognition programs, so that people can be matched with employment that aligns with their skills and education. Incentivize pathways to stable employment, and expanding bridging programs, especially around career mentorship and training. Strengthening access to settlement and community services. So, again, looking at improving awareness, like people, a lot of folks had shared either in stories or in the surveys that, that awareness was a big piece. If they weren't aware of what was available in their community, then they couldn't access it. So that could include, ensuring that those services are visible and that our services are coordinated and that we're not working in silos. Ensuring accessibility across our municipalities. So again, trying to bridge those geographic differences. Um, and expanding linguistically and culturally responsive services through creative partnerships. So again, sort of not operating in silos, but bridging those gaps within ourselves and our community to ensure that if that we can always pursue ways to expand our services and make them more responsive um, to the needs of the folks that are in our community. Fostering belonging and long-term community attachment. So this includes spaces and programs that support those social, recreational, and civic participation. And again, encouraging partnerships. It's so important. And lastly, but not least, enhancing data and research on immigrant mobility and retention. So we spoke earlier about how a key limitation to the data is when we look at onward migration and the percentage of folks that leave the region to pursue opportunities elsewhere, we don't necessarily know where folks go, and so whether they're going to neighboring regions, again, some elsewhere in the province, elsewhere in the country, or indeed outside of Canada. Um, and so, we might have an opportunity to explore longitudinal follow-up surveys, exit interviews, again, through partnerships, and collaboration with Statistics Canada, and municipalities. So, lots of areas that we can expand both our understanding of what's happening for our neighbors in the community, um, and also, exploring what our roles can be to promote that sense of belonging and those robust, interconnected systems.